Hey guys, today we're going to talk about non-Mendelian inheritance, and we'll go through a few examples of how to solve Punnett squares and look at problems that don't necessarily fall into that simple dominant recessive pattern. So the first one is incomplete dominance. So this is where one allele is not completely dominant over the other, and so you get a phenotype that's in between both of the alleles. So an example would be in snapdragon flowers. You have an allele for red flowers and an allele for white flower color. In heterozygous individuals, however, instead of getting red or white, you get a pink phenotype, so something in between. You can think of it like mixing paint. If you mix red paint with white paint, you end up with pink paint. So here's an example. In radishes, the gene that controls color exhibits incomplete dominance. So if you mixed pure breeding red radishes with pure breeding white radishes, you make purple radishes. What are the genotypic and phenotypic ratios? So first let's look at our genotypes and the alleles that are associated. Here we go. So we know that there's an allele for red. So I'm going to use R to equal red. And I'm going to use W to equal white. So if I have RR is red, WW is white, and RW is purple. So if I look here, it says, let's see, pure blah blah blah. What are the genotypic and phenotypic ratios when you cross a purple with a white? So a purple radish would be RW, and a white is going to be WW. So a white radish can either pass down the allele for W or a W. And a purple radish has both one red allele that it can pass on in its gametes or a white allele. And now I just go through and arrange my Punnett square. W, 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 R, W. Oop, sorry about that. So, if I want to look at the phenotypic and genotypic ratio. So genotype, in this case, would be 2 RWs and 2 WWs, or a 1-to-1 ratio, or 50% RW and 50% WW. For phenotype, I have 50% that are going to be, or 1 out of 2, that would be purple, and 1 out of 2 that would be white. So that's our incomplete dominance. Next we look at codominance. So in codominance, instead of getting something in between, you get something that's both. So they're both cohabitating in the phenotype. The classic example is the roan, R-O-A-N. That's where if you mix a red cattle or horse with a white horse, you get both red and white being expressed in the phenotype. So here, if we go back to our paint analogy, if you mix red paint with white paint, you get both red and white paint. Not something in between, but both being expressed at the same time. So again, our cattle example, so when we talk about roan cattle, they have both red and white hairs. So let's see, if we cross two, sorry about that, roan cattle, what is the probability of red, white, and roan colors in their offspring? Okay, so a roan cattle would have to have, so we'll make R red, W white, and we're crossing two roan. So in order to get roan, you would have RW equals roan. So if we cross two roan cattle, you have an RW and RW. So now RR, RW, RW, and WW. So both incomplete and codominance are actually a little bit easier to deal with than normal dominant recessive, because you'll notice that your heterozygous individuals, their phenotype is different from the homozygous individuals. And so you can always tell the genotype based on the phenotype for this type of inheritance pattern. So we want to know the probability of red, white, and roan colors in their offspring. You always go back to the question being asked. And so I've got a 1 red, so 1 red. I've got 2 roan, and we have 2 roan. Oops, sorry about that. And 1 white. You can also say there's a 25% chance of having offspring with red, a 50% chance of having an offspring with roan color, and 25% chance of having offspring with white. All right, so next we're going to talk about multiple alleles. So in the case of multiple alleles, that just means that for a particular trait, you have two or you have more than 2 alleles. So some examples for that are blood type and eye color. That's part of the reason why we don't just have brown and blue. You have multiple colors of eyes because there's multiple genes and there's multiple alleles for those genes. But we're going to focus on blood type. So blood type is interesting. When we talk about the ABO blood groups, what we're really talking about are some of the cell surface markers found on your red blood cells. And so A and B are codominant, meaning that they'll both be expressed if they're present. And that's just because the allele for A is coding for a particular surface marker, and the allele for B is coding for a different surface marker. So if you have the allele for A and the allele for B, you're going to make both of those proteins. O, however, is going to be recessive, and that's because O has no cell surface markers. And so if you don't have the gene for it, then you don't make the markers. But if you have any of the other possible alleles, then you'll be that trait. So when you're solving these problems, it's good to remember that you can have multiple genotypes that result in the type A or type B phenotype. So here, if the mother has type A blood and her husband has type B blood, what are the possible genotypes for those parents? So mom has A. So to have type A blood, you could either be, when we do IA, or IA having, so homozygous for the A allele, or she could be IA little I, which is O. Dad's the same, so he could be homozygous for the B allele, or he could be heterozygous with one allele for B and one allele for O. So we make O the lowercase I because it's recessive to both A and B. So Dad is claiming that the child can't be his because it's type O. So we're going to use these guys because they offer the most choice in possible phenotype. So I could do multiple Punnett squares with all of the different combinations, but because they're just asking about the possibility, I think I'm going to just work with the two heterozygous possibilities. So let's see. If both parents are heterozygous, that would mean that mom had IA little I and dad has IB little I. Then they could have children with the AB blood type, the B blood type, the A blood type, or the O blood type. So it's entirely possible that they could have a child with type O blood. All right, the next case that we're going to talk about are the sex-linked traits. So humans have 23 pairs of homologous chromosomes. The first 22 we call autosomes. The last pair are going to be called the sex chromosomes because they determine the sex of the offspring. Just a little disclaimer, there's a lot of research currently being done into gender and how those sex chromosomes affect gender. So it's kind of a gray area right now. But for this, right now, we're just going to consider the most common ideas about X and Y chromosomes. All right. So in humans, if an individual has a Y chromosome, then they're considered male. So females get 2 X chromosomes and males get X and Y. So it's really the dad who determines sex of the offspring because mom only has the X to give. So she's always going to contribute an X chromosome to the offspring, and dad will contribute either an X or a Y. And so for every child, you have a 50% chance of having a boy and a 50% chance of having a girl. Sex-linked traits are traits that are found on the sex chromosomes. In particular, we focus on genes that are located on the X chromosome. Generally, we're looking at recessive traits located on the X chromosome. An example would be red-green color blindness. Certain individuals can't tell the difference between red and green, and that's a genetic trait. Now, since it's found on the X chromosome, it tends to be more common in males than females, and that's really just because they only get 1 X chromosome. Females, on the other hand, have 2 X chromosomes. So since it's a recessive trait, if they have 1 allele for normal color vision, they won't show the phenotype of colorblindness. Most sex-linked traits are recessive. This means that both X chromosomes must have the gene in order for the trait to be expressed. Since only 1 X chromosome is present in males, if he has the sex-linked gene, or the allele, then the trait will be expressed. That's why they tend to be more common in males than females, because a female would have to get the allele from both mom and dad. Not impossible, but less likely. Females who have just 1 of the alleles on the X chromosome are called carriers. That's because they're not expressing the trait, but they're carrying it on, and they could pass it to the next generation. So let's look at what a sex-linked Punnett square actually looks like. So if we have a colorblind male marrying a normal female, what are the offspring genotypes and phenotypes? And I'm going to actually not use C because it's confusing and I will mess it up. I'm going to use B. So, let's see. A colorblind male, so he must have the recessive allele for colorblindness, and he only has one X, so that's his genotype. Marries a normal female, so we're assuming that she's homozygous with the normal allele for color vision. All right, so now we do the cross. So we have mom here and dad over here. So now if we look at the possible offspring, you have one carrier female, two carrier females, because neither of them will be colorblind, but they're both going to have the allele for colorblindness. And then you have two males, both with normal color vision. So the genotypes will be female carriers, X big B, X little b, X big B, X little b, or normal males. Let's look at this one. A normal male, not colorblind, marries a carrier female. What are the offspring genotypes and phenotypes? So a normal male, so that's X big B, Y, marries a carrier female. So she must have one normal color vision allele, but she's carrying one colorblind allele. So let's look at what that looks like. So there's dad, and here is mom. So there's one normal female. And here we have a carrier female. Normal male. Ooh, colorblind male. So here we have a 25% chance of having a male who's colorblind. We have a 25% chance of having a normal female, carrier female, and normal male. All right, so we've had enough practice with those. Let's look at another example of a sex-linked trait. Hemophilia is characterized by uncontrolled bleeding, so it's the inability for blood to clot. In the past, it used to be fatal because we had no way of treating individuals who had hemophilia. Now you can take blood clotting agents. This is another sex-linked disorder, and so it's recessive and it's on the X chromosome. So let's look at this. If a male with hemophilia married a normal woman, what is the probability of one of their children having female or one of them being a carrier? Okay, so I've got a man with hemophilia, so he must be X, H, and we're going to do lowercase h for hemophilia, Y. That's not a very good Y, sorry. And then a normal woman, so she must have big H, big H. So let's see what their offspring would look like. So she is X big H, X big H. He is X little h, Y. So the possible offspring they could have okay, so let's see. We have 1, 2 carrier females. So all of the female offspring will be carriers. And all of the male offspring will be normal. So they have a 0% probability of having children with hemophilia. However, they could have grandchildren with hemophilia because their daughters are all carriers. It's interesting to note that males cannot pass sex-linked traits onto their sons because they only pass the Y chromosome onto their son. All right, so that's it for non-Mendelian traits. If you have any questions, make sure you ask when you get to class. Bye.